I am delighted to welcome everybody to this special Zoom virtual author visit. Tonight, we have the privilege of being joined by AJ Pearce, live
Hi,
from London.
everyone.
If this
Yes,
is an audience, this is where you'd all applaud. So at home, I hope you're all applauding at home.
this is where I'd fall off the stage or knock over my water if we were all in the same room.
Yeah,
Hello,
so this is
everyone.
perfect. Perfect. Yeah. All right. And here's a little bit of background on AJ Pearce, who wants me to go by AJ. So AJ's creative journey has been significantly influenced by her remarkable collection of over 800 vintage women's and news magazines. This inspiring treasure trove has served as the foundation for her acclaimed series, The Emmy Lake Chronicles. That chronicle set includes Dear Mrs. Bird, Yours Cheerfully, and the recently released, the reason we're all here tonight, Mrs. Porter Calling. We extend our thanks to AJ as well as Cassandra Rhodes from Scribner, whose effort and collaboration have made this event possible. We also express our thanks to all of the libraries and patrons joining us tonight. AJ has graciously stayed up way past her bedtime to be here for us. She is live from England, and we just want to welcome you, AJ. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's really kind. And hello, everyone. I hope you're really well. It's a Monday night. Well done, us. We got through Monday. So,
Good
no,
job.
it's lovely to be here. Thank you.
All right. So, AJ, we have some questions for you tonight. Some of these were generated by readers, and we're just so excited to bring these to you tonight. So we'll start it off with, according to your official biography, a chance discovery of a 1939 women's magazine became the inspiration for the Emmy Lake Chronicles. Can you tell us more about this discovery and how it evolved into the series?
Thank you. Yes, of course. Do you know, it was one of those moments where it was complete luck that one click on something I thought might be of interest on eBay ended up changing my entire life, which sounds a bit dramatic, I realize. And if you were reading a novel about a woman who buys a magazine online and ends up changing her life, you'd think, oh, come on. But that's essentially what happened. I mean, it took about 10 years, but that is what happened. I was on eBay. I'd been writing for a while as a hobby, and I'd tried to write a sort of contemporary rom-com kind of thing. I did a first draft of that, which didn't have a plot, which was a shame. I was excited to be writing it, but it wasn't very good, but it was part of the learning journey. And I needed to find a new idea, and I happened to be on eBay, and I guess all the algorithm things work their magic, and I like vintage stuff, and up popped a photo of a magazine called Woman's Own, which is still going. It's still a huge brand over here, and the magazine was from July 1939, so a few weeks before World War II broke out for Britain. And I bought it. It was £4.95, and I bought it completely on a whim because I thought it would be fun to read. And when I opened it, it was an immediate wow, because I've always loved magazines. I think I can chart my life through the magazines, from the sort of comics for little girls through to teen mags, and all the way through now I read gardening magazines. And women's weekly magazines over here, the format hasn't changed that much in 80 years, in that you have fashion and beauty and fiction, cooking, and of course the problem page. And so everything was totally familiar, but it was 80 years ago, or 70 actually then. And I immediately felt at home, but it was as if I'd been transported back to this different era. And I loved all of it. The adverts were quite funny and the fashion was beautiful, but it was the problem page, or as we call them over here, agony aunts, the advice columnists, that really grabbed me, because there were all these little snippets of people's lives. So I started collecting them from all eras at first, and then I sort of honed in mostly on World War II and some earlier. The earliest magazine I have is, believe it or not, from 1771.
Wow.
Which is bonkers, isn't it? I've got a volume of magazines from back then, so they've been going forever. And I just knew I wanted to write something about young people working in this area, because the problem pages are, you have a mini novel, 6 mini novels on every page, and that's where it all sort of started, and it snowballed from there.
Oh, that's great. Oh, no, that's great. And it's a perfect segue to my next question. So for those who may be joining us because they're curious about A.J. Pearce and A.J. Pearce books, can you just share a little bit about the series and Emmy Lake?
Of course. Emmy is the heroine. The books are written in the first person, so it's her, very much her story. And she's a young woman who is bright and optimistic. She's quite young in the first book. She's, I think, 23 when the series starts. And she dreams of being a war journalist. And she's bright, and she's committed to people, and she's passionate about pretty much everything. And she and her best friend Bunty live in London. And one day Emmy sees an advert from the publishers of the Evening Chronicle for an assistant. And she assumes it's an assistant on the newspaper and is very excited, goes for the interview. And this is one of the only bits that's based on my real life. Is so excited in the interview, doesn't really listen, which I has happened to me in the past. And she doesn't hear the bit which says it's not the job isn't actually for the Evening Chronicle. It's for their rather dilapidated sister magazine, which is this women's weekly. And Emmy ends up getting a job as an assistant to a tough old advice columnist on Women's Friend. And Emmy is disappointed because wrongly she thinks that working on women's magazines isn't a valid bit of war work. How wrong she is. And she also sees that this elderly agony aunt, as we call it, just ignores lots of the readers' questions. And she is a woman who is a Victorian, and she has Victorian morals and outlooks and views. And she won't answer anything she thinks is an unpleasantness, which is relationships and sex and stuff like that. So Emmy sees all these people with really genuine problems being ignored and starts to secretly write back. And that is the start, by mistake, of her journalistic career. And the books, which I should say, particularly if the copies in the libraries are out, don't worry, you don't have to start with the first one. Grab one of the later ones if you're waiting to borrow the books. I try to write them as standalone books so that anyone can pick them up at the library or at a bookshop and know what's happening very quickly. And the books follow Emmy's life and her friends. They're even though they're set in the war and they're historical novels, essentially they're books about friendship, about female friendships and relationships, and how people come together and become chosen family, actually, and how in the most challenging of times you need your friends. And as the books continue, all sorts of people become involved, and many of the men are away, so the women come together and support each other. And it's about, I used to say they're books about extraordinary people in challenging times, and extraordinary times. And now I've sort of thought about it more. They are really books about friendship and about people who have to be extraordinary in order to be normal. Because when you're in the middle of the Blitz, in a time of great danger and worry and deprivation, with the stakes so high, this group of friends somehow try to have normal lives, fall in love, go to the cinema, do all the normal things. But they have to be pretty much extraordinary in order to achieve that, because it's so dangerous living in London. And so that's a really long answer to a very good question.
Perfect. That's perfect.
But I hope that.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. All right. So your newest book, Mrs. Porter Calling, has been described as a comfort book. It's akin to meeting up with an old friend. How did you manage to craft a narrative that gracefully handles tough subjects while still offering an enjoyable reading experience? And you did touch on this a little bit in your previous answer, but if you'd like to expand.
Yes, I'm really proud of Mrs. Porter calling, because Mrs. Porter is the new baddie. In this book, Emmy is now, she's grown up. She's a really decent advice columnist. She's not the young, naive, give it a go heroine of the first book. She's doing a great job, and Mrs. Porter is the new publisher and owner of the magazine. And it was really important for me to give Emmy a new challenge, and so I've brought in a new owner because they can't get rid of her easily. But in terms of so she has a big challenge with Mrs. Porter, and there are lots of fun bits in the new book, and lots of jolly stuff. And for anyone who hasn't read the books, sometimes that sounds a bit odd, that books set in World War II can be funny and cheery, but they I hope are. And in terms of your question of coming in with the sort of the darker, more serious parts of things, you kind of have to. These are cheerful books, and I hope hopeful books, but they're set in a war, and it would be disrespectful not to have the really tough stuff in there. This isn't a theme park. This is I work very hard, and I really hope that the books are authentic. So in terms of balancing that, the jolliness and the japes, together with the hurdles she has to get through, really it all comes down to the characters. And what I try to do, and anyone watching, I hope if you've read the books, you might agree with this. I hope so. My aim is that the readers will care about the characters as much as I do, and as much as the characters do about each other. We're all in this together, essentially. It's Emmy's telling the story, and I happen to have written it, but I kind of always feel that Emmy and me and you guys, when we open page 1, it's us lot all together going through what Emmy and Bunty and Guy and all the others are going through. And I think particularly with a series, I've lived with these characters for about 12 years now, and they are so real to me that, and my job is to try to make them real to the readers. And I think if you, as a reader myself, obviously, if you really care about characters in the books, you go with them through the fun times, and when it comes to the tough times, it shouldn't feel weird or jolty, because all our lives have highs and lows. So I try to sort of make the books relatable, I suppose, with this very gutsy but normal young woman, who could be any of us, or our daughters, or our friends, or whatever it is. First of all, I try to create characters in the world that we all kind of feel, okay, we're with you, so that when the happy stuff happens, we kind of have a bit of a smile. But then when inevitably tough stuff happens, we understand, just as we would if one of our friends went through something rotten. When you go out to dinner with a friend, or you meet up or chat on the phone, and you're expecting to just chat about watching Ted Lasso last week or whatever, and they which I can do endlessly, I might add, and they turn up and they say, do you know, this awful thing is happening, and you have to turn like that. Immediately you're with them, whether you're having a brilliant conversation about Ted Lasso, or they're worried about their husband. And so I hope that's how the books take all of us with them.
Definitely. Thank you so much. That's a great response. Oh, that's great. Did you draw in any inspiration from real life figures while creating the series?
Yes, lots. I mean, the original, the old dragon that is Mrs. Bird is based partly on the agony aunts of the earlier magazines, who were really harsh, really tough, really kind of get on with it if anyone wrote in. I mean, awful. And also my great grandmother, who was born in the late 1880s. who was absolutely terrifying woman. She wasn't posh, but she thought she was. She was a housekeeper by trade for posh people, and she was her maiden name was Henrietta Bird, which is the name of the character, and she scared the heck out of all of us. I once did a talk like this in my mum's local library, and I was talking about Henrietta Bird, my great grandma, and I said, well, as a little girl, I was really scared of her. And then from the back of the audience, my mother shouted out, "Weren't we all?" So heckled by my own mother in a library.
That's
Things
funny.
you never thought you'd have. So people like that, the friendship is sort of that comes from all of my friends, and that's that came really early, actually, and I hope comes through all of the books, that Emmy and her best friend Bunty have this unconditional love and support for each other, even if one of them has come up with the most harebrained scheme. So very early on, one of the early scenes I wrote had Emmy finding this advert for a job and rushing home and saying to Bunty, "Look, there's an assistant. This could be my big break," at the newspaper publishers. And Bunty looks at the ad and just says, "This is your job. This is your job. You're going to get it." And they get very excited. And Emmy says to Bunce, what are we going to be doing in the future? And Bunty says something like, "Do you know, if you're going to be a lady war correspondent, I think I might be on the BBC after the war. I've always quite wanted to be on the radio." To which Emmy just goes, "Brilliant idea. You'll be fantastic," kind of thing. And that's straight out of my friends, that kind of, if any of us comes up with a really stupid idea or is going out with someone awful, they're going, "Yeah, he's lovely."
Yeah.
And then, when it goes horribly wrong, going, "What a complete idiot. We always hated him. You're brilliant. Don't listen to him." Or, "Oh, you want to run a marathon? What a nightmare. We'll come." That's Emmy and Bunty. And that's it. That's right from my friends.
That's great. Oh, thank you. Okay, so now let's get a little this is a fun question here. If you could invite one of the supporting characters from your books over for dinner, who would you choose and why?
I've never been asked that before, and that is the best question ever. Thank you. I would ask the firemen, Fred and Roy, who are in all of the books, because Emmy volunteers as a telephonist at a fire station, and the gentlemen, Roy and Fred, are firefighters, and they're in their late 30s, early 40s, and they are good, roughy, tufty London blokes, and they're brave. The firefighters did an incredible job in the Blitz. I mean, they just, before the Blitz, men in the fire service were seen as that was the soft option because it wasn't the army. But they did such an incredible job here, as London was essentially on fire, that they became real heroes. And Roy and Fred are based on an article I read in a 1940 issue of Picture Post magazine, and they're brave and they're tough and they're incredibly loyal to the women and they look after them, but they've got a real twinkle in their eye. And Roy's a great dancer, and they're always having fun. And in Mrs. Porter Calling, the firemen get embroiled with there's a character called Thelma who comes to stay with her children, and the firemen get the kids into all sorts of troubles and take them to the pub and meet up with some rather dubious characters. It's all above board, it's fine, but they would be brilliant fun to have to dinner, and they'd be great because I would take them to a gastro pub, as they're called now, and they would be baffled at people spending what would be the equivalent to about 6 months' wages on pie and chips. So they would. This question has made me really wish they were real.
Yeah.
Oh, and then of course there's the new fireman, False Teeth Frank. He's great. He and his new teeth would come as well.
Great. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. All right. Are there any plans for movie or television adaptations of your work in the near future? And how does that prospect make you feel?
Oh, it'd be great. There, there have been talks and stuff. I mean, I think TV takes forever, and obviously with the writer's strike, nothing would be happening at the moment anyway until all that is sorted for the good, we hope. But yes, that's the hope. There's nothing at the moment, but if once the strike is sorted and everything, if anyone wants to write to Netflix or anyone else, that'd be lovely. Over here we have Sunday night TV. Over here is always a drama series. It might be Downton or Call the Midwife, that sort of thing. And we have antique shows that everyone watches as well. It's really lovely, cozy TV that can also make you cry. So that would be the dream. And I keep promising everyone that we can be extras in it as well. So it's really important it gets actually have this dream comes true.
Yeah. Well, we can be the extra Zoom audience in the show. No,
we could. Well, yes, actually, I think it's in yours, Cheerfully. I wrote. Really should stop telling people this, but I wrote a scene based in Waterloo Station, which is one of the really big London stations, which was part of the plot. It's not gratuitous. But I put quite a lot of detail in, partly because I hoped it would set the scene, but partly because I thought if this ever gets made into TV or anything else, they're going to need so many extras. All the people I promised it to.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. And I love the planning there.
Dream. It's a dream.
You got it. It can happen. So actress Anna Popplewell narrates the audio versions of your books, and people who love movies might know her from the playing Susan in the Chronicles of Narnia movies. How did she become the narrator? How did she get to that role? And what did you think when you first heard her voice bringing your characters to life in that format?
We're so lucky to have her, and particularly as I'm pretty sure my British publishers won't see this, I'm going to take the credit on this one. I think I found her purely by we were thinking of who is the right person to narrate the first book, and I remember sitting at my computer looking at the voice actor agents, and they all have the show reels and stuff, and just playing voice after voice after voice, trying to hear the Emmy in my head. And Anna Popplewell just is so brilliant. She's I think she's in her early 30s now, but she can play from Emmy in her 20s through to Lord Overton, who is a 75-year-old aristocrat, to Roy and Fred, the Fire Boys, through to Stan, who's only 8. And Mrs. Pye, who is in the new book. Mrs. Pye is the fashion and beauty editor at the magazine. Pamela Pye on Duty for Beauty, and Anna does them all so brilliantly. And the first time I heard her, it was a bit embarrassing actually. I went down to the studio, and there's quite a sad bit in the first book. I mean, there are sad bits in all of them actually. And so I sort of said, hello, thank you so much for reading the books. And it was all very exciting. And then I sat down, and she immediately started reading a particularly tough bit. And within about 30 seconds, there were tears streaming down my face, which was, professional. So just, she does it so well. She does read it beautifully. And she's good at humor. She's good at sad stuff.
Great.
Super lucky to have her.
Oh, thank you. In your research into advice columns and World War II era advice columns, what was the funniest or the worst bit of advice you saw in print?
Well, the funniest, I think the funniest stuff in the magazines that I have tend to be the adverts, because they're ridiculous sometimes. My favorite ever one is this was obviously the days of the great Shirley Temple, and there's a brilliant advert for perming lotion for baby's hair, which is so wrong on so many levels, and health and safety wise would never ever happen now, but there's this great little advert of seeing a very Shirley Temple lookalike with mothers. Your little darling can look like this. Or there was one that made me laugh for baking powder for making cakes, and Borix baking powder. And there was a picture of a jam roly-poly or some lovely stodgy puddingy thing, and then a great big flash over the top just saying men love it. Awful, but just very funny. So I like the ads. And the worst advice, and to be entirely serious for a moment, the magazines that I read from that era are very much of their time, which means that while some of the answers and the advice, in fact, much of it is more supportive than perhaps I had thought before I started collecting. Some of it is, by our standards, i.e. far better standards, completely morally reprehensible. I mean, that there are and I think any of us, and I know this is a discussion for many other times about do you edit books written in a different time in terms of how offensive they can be with their language and attitudes. And I'm obviously not going to get into that, but certainly these magazines as a part of my research, it's a very good reminder that in a horrible way, that attitudes on some issues were awful. There's a storyline, in fact, in Dear Mrs. Bird, where a young woman has fallen in love with a Polish airman based in Britain, and her parents don't approve of it. And the old advice columnist, Mrs. Bird, she recognises the bravery of the Polish airman, which was known to be outstanding, and it was sort of thank you for your service, but no, you don't marry as she would say, a foreigner, and that comes directly from the pages of these magazines. There was a terribly narrow-minded view on that. Some of the answers when readers had written in saying their husband was having an affair, or sometimes the answers are just, well, he'll, put on some lipstick, be nice, and he'll come back to you, kind of thing. I mean, and you just, I keep spreadsheets of the problems because I have so many magazines, and you can see them highlighted in yellow or whatever on my spreadsheets. Horrible answer. But at the other end of things, sometimes the readers were the ones with the odd attitudes. There was one example of a young woman had written in who had become pregnant. She wasn't married, and back in the 40s, abortion was illegal in Britain at the time, and the only and equally you couldn't keep your child if you were an unmarried mother. So the only option at the time was to have the child adopted. And a reader had written in saying, I'm not married, the father isn't going to marry me, but I don't want to give my baby away. Is there anything I can do? And the advice columnist said, well, there are organizations who can help you on this, and they don't give the name of the organization. In most problem pages, they tended, when there were detailed information like this, they would write back to the reader. They'd say, send in a stamped addressed envelope for details. So the advice columnist said, there are options, and I will write to you to let you know. And I happened to also buy the same magazine 2 or 3 issues later, where there was a letter printed from another reader saying, we are absolutely outraged at your dreadful morals, telling a reader that it is all right for her to keep her child even though she isn't married. And so I found that very interesting, because you can see that the advice columnists are having to take a moral route and stick with values that they believe in, but they could well alienate or offend some readers, or they could help others, or vice versa. So really interesting. And you know, my I take my hat off to advice columnists. It's not a job I would like to have a go at. Certainly not now, but back then, yeah, there were lots of difficult scenarios, some where the advice columnists do not come through well, and others where you think, wow, well done, it was 1942 and you
Yeah.
said that, good for you. So
Oh,
yeah,
that's great. Oh,
very interesting.
we got a really good question from Teresa M, who's watching us now. And
Oh,
she asks, what is the best piece of writing advice you've received that you still use in your own writing?
get on with it. And I'm awful at that. I will put all my books in alphabetical order, and the CDs or whatever. The key bits of writing advice, I think, are if you're thinking of writing, honestly, give it a crack, because we are all writers. And one of the best things about writing is we're all already writers. If you've written an email or a text or a letter to the bank manager, you've written something. I recently have started trying to learn how to paint watercolors, and I know how to hold the brush, sort of, but I have nothing to go on. And I realized, I was chatting to someone the other day and I was saying, well, whereas with writing, we've all written something, so you're already a good way towards doing it. And I would say, if you're just starting out, the best advice is I would go online and Google writing prompts, because you can get loads of stuff online which will just kick you off, get you writing. And it might say, you've seen a man walking down the road carrying a chicken. Why is he carrying the chicken? Who is he? What's the chicken's name? Not that silly, but
No?
and it just starts you off by starting to get your imagination muscles going. And the other best advice, I think, is that I've had, and I always say, is it's absolutely write what you love. Don't think, I want to be published, so I'd better write a thriller, or I'd better write romantasy, because that's really big right now. When I started writing, I can remember sitting at my desk one day going, I don't know if anyone's going to find this interesting. I'm writing this about this quirky little thing. Will this work? But I thought, well, I'm enjoying writing it, so we've got to give it a go, because it takes, as I'm sure any of you who write, it takes so long to write a book. And it's a real roller coaster. And there are days when you just want to chuck the whole lot on a bonfire. So if you don't start out by absolutely loving the idea you have, you are in for a really dreadful time. So yeah,
Good advice.
write what you love, and don't worry, just leap in and start.
Thank you, Teresa, for the question. That was a great question.
Yeah, it's lovely. Thank you.
Do you plan to continue this series?
Yes, I am researching the next book now. And the plan is that we'll take the characters to the end of the war. And so everyone knows what will happen, if they'll make it, if they do, what they'll be doing. And so definitely the series will go to the end of the war. And then I'd like to see if I can write anything else. That would be terrifying. And hopefully I can. But I think I'll always come back to these characters, maybe not in books, but maybe shorter stories, or online, or do something, because I'd love to see what happens to Emmy and Bunty 10 years later, or as a couple of old ladies in the 1990s or 2000s, you know, giving advice 50 years, 60 years later.
Oh, that's great. Oh, thank you. So finally, what are you currently reading, and what are your favorite books to recommend? outside of your own work, of course.
Well, I'm now going to use this as an embarrassing excuse to plug my newsletter.
Okay.
So yeah, every month in my newsletter, I recommend 3 or 4 books that I'm either reading or are favorites of mine. So if anyone's interested in that, please sign up for the newsletter. It's just a cheerful bit of nonsense, really, but news about my stuff and lots of book stuff. So the ones I am recommending at the moment, and I checked on the US publishers because things come out at different times, but a recent book I absolutely loved was Claire Newman's We All Dream of Impossible Things, which is one of the best novels about friendship I think I've ever read. It's about 2 friends. It's a contemporary novel. And it won't be for everyone. It's set in a hospice, so parts of it are absolutely heartbreaking, but it's also one of the funniest novels, and it so understands friendship. I love that. And so I really recommend that. And I've recently, and I had to write this down because it's got a different title in the States from back here. And it's Claire Pooley's Iona Iverson's Rules for Commuting. Claire Pooley wrote The Authenticity Project, and Iona Iverson's Rules for Commuting, which is called The People at Platform 5 over here, which is a lot easier to remember, is about a group of people on a British commuter train who get brought together by an incident on the train. And it's got great characters, and it's warm and it's funny, and it's also about how British people would rather die than speak to a stranger on a train, which if any of you have been over here, you'll know that British people look distinctly uncomfortable if anybody strikes up a conversation on a train. So yes, that I've really enjoyed.
Oh, great. Beatrice is asking, where do they get on your newsletter? How do they do that? Is it on your website?
Yes, please go to the website. There isn't a pop-up or any of those clever but irritating things. So if you scroll down to the foot of the homepage, or there's a little letter icon at the top, and you can sign up for my newsletter there. That usually goes out the last week of the month. So there'll be one soon. Or I'm on social media. I'm mostly on Facebook and Instagram, and I'm at AJ Pearce Writes. So if anybody wants to say hello, it would be lovely to see you.
You can find all 3 of the Emmy Lake Chronicle books at your local library, your favorite bookstore, or where you get your e-content. And again, thank you so much, AJ, for having us tonight and staying up so late to
I'm really awake now.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks everyone. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for everyone who's watched. There've been lovely questions, and it's been great fun. So, and thank you for your support, because being published in America was beyond a dream. So to think of being in libraries where people in the States where people go in and borrow my books is beyond a dream come true. So thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate it.